Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for tuning into the video today. In today's video, we're going to be going through a basic beginner starter weights program that you can implement into your health and fitness journey today. That's going to have a variety of different exercises. The movements that we're going to be working through is chest press, lat pull down, seated row, and squats. So it's going to be a full body workout that is going to stimulate all of your muscle fibers from a beginner level in a safe way. I'd like to reiterate that this is not the perfect program. By no means am I saying this is the best way to start. This is just the best way I have found when it has come to teaching my clients and building a solid foundation for them to be able to know what they're doing, feel confident in their weight sessions, feel comfortable in the gym, and also be able to build over time into more technical, beneficial exercises. Okay, so there's three principles that I want to go through just before we jump into that I think are really important, that I think you should take note of because I will be talking about them. Number one is technique. Pretty self-explanatory. It's just making sure that we're performing each exercise effectively to be able to activate the right muscles and for you to be able to feel confident with what movements that you're trying to do, whether you're doing it with a trainer or you might be doing it by yourself. Okay, the second point is RPE, so rate of perceived exertion. Now this is a point that I only really teach to beginner level clients purely because it gives them a fundamental basis to understand exactly how hard they should be pushing themselves, and it gives them a good guide to understand how hard they actually like to push themselves in the beginning. Now down the track, obviously the RPE scale can start to be removed because it's just going to be the idea of making sure that you are pushing yourself harder than the last time that you trained. But we want to make sure that the RPE scale matches up to the technique and it allows you to be in a position where you're pushing yourself hard enough that you feel like you're getting something out of your sessions, but it's also not breaking down the technique cues that you're also trying to learn. Okay, so moving into point three, which I already mentioned, which is progressive overload. Basically what that is making sure that you're going harder than last time, as I said. So as a basic example, you might be doing a lat pull down, doing 3 sets of 10, and in this session you did 40 kilos. As you become more confident with the technique and the RPE scale that you'd like to work towards, then you can start to work towards building that weight up over time. So the following week when you do that exercise again, you might try 45 kilos, you might try 50 kilos, and the stimulation of that exercise is what allows your body to change and grow. So through those 3 points today, guys, you're going to have a little bit more clarity on what we need to be working towards. And then down the track in later videos, we are going to go into more advanced programming that can start to delve down into different avenues, whether your goal is hypertrophy training to be able to build muscle mass, whether your goal is to be able to be stronger and build more fundamentals around being functionally strong through more compound movements and everything in between. So I hope you enjoy the video and we'll jump into our first exercise. So just as a preface before we jump into our first exercise, guys, a few details of the workout that you should be aware of is each exercise that we do today is going to consist of 3 sets of 10 repetitions. The first set being a warm-up set, so allowing our body to start to feel and understand the movement that we're working through and allowing the muscles to be primed and ready to go for our following 2 sets, which are our working sets. Okay, so in our warm-up set, I spoke about RPE earlier in the video. We're going to be working towards an RPE of 4. I know that sounds a little bit pedantic, but all that means is that we're picking a weight that is extremely comfortable for us, but we can still feel the muscles that are trying to be worked. Okay, from that point, when we go into our first 2 working sets, we're going to start with our second set being at an RPE of 7. So being in a position where we're starting to fatigue a little bit more, but by the end of the set, we still have a few more repetitions left in the tank. And then based on your confidence level in the third set, that's when you can start to set the bar a little bit higher again if you'd like to push yourself a little bit further. But remember, the goal of this whole workout is to make sure that we have a fundamental understanding of technique. So let's jump into our first exercise. So jumping into our first exercise, guys, we're going to be going through our seated chest press. So I'm going to start off with just a few technique cues that I'd like you to be aware of, but also keep in your mind because it's going to be technique cues that are also going to be in later exercises in this video. So the fundamental ones are keeping our chin neutral, our chest proud, our shoulders back and down, and keeping our core activated. So what that means is putting our body in an optimal position to be able to be in a neutral setting, for our core to be activated and be in a safe position to be able to perform each exercise. Okay, so that's the foundation. Now throughout the video, each exercise is going to have different positions that our levers are going to be in, but for this exercise, we're going to be pushing forward. Okay, so how we're setting this up is obviously we set the weight that's appropriate for the set that we're doing. If we're starting with a warm-up, we're going with a lighter weight. If we're going with a working set, we're going with a heavier weight. Okay, so we're keeping our chin neutral, chest up, shoulders back and down, core tight. Our hands are coming up on the handles here. We want to make sure that these handles are in line with about our nipple line. Okay, so we don't want it too high where our shoulders are going to be cramping up here, and we don't want it too low that our shoulders are dropping down underneath the bar. We want it just in the middle. Okay, wrist is going to be neutral and your elbows are going to be in line with your wrists. From that point, we're going to be pushing up up to the top of the movement and keeping a slight bend in our elbows. Okay, we don't want to be locking the elbow out entirely because that can put too much pressure on our joints. We want to keep a slight bend. From that position, we're keeping that chest proud, keeping our core tight. We're slowly coming back until we start to feel a stretch through our chest, and then we're pushing up to the top again. So the point in which you should start to feel a stretch in your chest is when your elbow comes past your shoulder girdle. Okay, so from that point, pushing straight up to the top, squeezing through the chest, slowly coming back down, keeping the shoulders down, the chin neutral, and pushing up again, and slowly coming back down. Okay, keeping a nice controlled tempo, and that is our first exercise. One thing to keep in mind, I wasn't doing obviously because I was talking to you guys, was making sure that you're breathing. So you want to make sure through that point, as you push up, you are exhaling, and on the way down, you are inhaling. Okay, what that does, it allows you to be able to be in a position where you can perform the exercise effectively and feel comfortable as you start to fatigue later in the set. We don't want to hold our breath because that can start to make the movement a little bit erratic as we start to fatigue. So moving into our second exercise, which is our lat pull down. So just as a reminder that our starting cues are the same as what we did in the previous exercise. So we're keeping our chin neutral, our chest proud, our shoulders back and down, and we're keeping our core tight. The only difference is now we're working our lats, hence lat pull down. And obviously we're not going to be pushing out in front of us to do that. We're going to be having our hands above our head and pulling down towards our chin. So with this machine, we want to make sure that the pads are set nice and tight on our legs. We don't want the weight to move us anywhere that we don't want to go or start to break our technique down. And we want to make sure we set the appropriate weight for the set that we are doing. So if we're doing a warm-up set, we want the weight to be a little bit lighter just so we get used to the movement. And if you're going to a working set, you can obviously push the boundaries for how you feel in this particular exercise. So from here, how we set this up is we want to make sure that we're grabbing the bar in the right position. The way that we determine that is where your hand is when you put it directly above your head. If it's directly above your shoulder, we want to go just on the outside of that and grabbing onto the bar. The reason for that is when you pull down, it's going to make sure that your elbow is directly underneath your wrist, and you're going to be in the best position to pull down into the rib cage to start to activate through the lats. Okay, so grabbing onto the bar in the appropriate position, we're sitting down, our legs are going underneath the pads, we're keeping our chin neutral, chest proud, shoulders back and down, and our core tight. From there, we are exhaling on the way down and inhaling on the way up. Keeping our elbows driving into our rib cage, squeezing our lats, and slowly coming back up. What we want to avoid, especially as we start to fatigue, which is really common, we want to avoid our shoulders going with the weight and breaking down our technique. What starts to happen is then each repetition becomes different. The goal for each exercise is to make sure each repetition is the same, so we're working the muscle the right amount of times. So from there, we're keeping our shoulders set, pulling down, squeezing through the lats, and we're slowly coming back up. If you start to feel that your technique is breaking down, if you feel like that you're starting to swing through the movement, or you feel like that your shoulders are starting to round or go with the weight, we need to make sure that we bring the weight down to something that's a little bit more appropriate. So moving into our third exercise, guys, we're going to be going into our seated row. Okay, so similar cues as what we did before. I'm going to sound like a broken record today. So keeping our chin neutral, chest proud, shoulders back and down, and keeping our core tight. Obviously the differences are now we're working muscles in the middle of our back, and we're not going to be doing it by pulling down above our head. We're going to be doing it by pulling to our belly button and towards our midsection through a handle that's going to be in front of us. So how we set up for this movement is our feet are obviously going to be on the supporters on the machine, and we're going to be grabbing the handles in those upright positions. Now, if your gym doesn't have a close grip setting, that's okay. A wide grip is fine, which is the bar that we used in the previous exercise, but preferably try and use a close grip if you can. It's a lot easier to get your shoulder blades back and together. So from that position, what we're going to do is we're going to gently lean back and take the weight with us to a starting position where we're in an upright position. From there, same cues as before, but from here, we're going to be pulling the weight towards our midsection and towards our belly button while squeezing the middle of our back and slowly coming back out. Once we reach extension, we're pulling in, squeezing the middle of our back, and slowly coming back out. The things that we need to keep in mind for this exercise is we want our shoulders to be able to dictate the movement. We want to be able to pull our shoulders back because that is the only thing that's going to allow the muscles in our back to start to activate. If you start to feel the movement in your biceps, what that means is that we're not pulling with our shoulder and our shoulder blade, we're pulling with our arms. And there's a big difference. If we're pulling with our shoulders will come all the way back and together. If we're pulling with our arms, our shoulders will stay forward, but our elbows will still come too far back and we start to feel it through here. So we want to keep that shoulder set back, so we can squeeze our shoulder blades together. Okay, so same thing, make sure you're focusing on your breathing, keeping your core tight, keeping everything set, and pulling back so you can feel it in the middle of your back. All right guys, so moving into our final exercise, which is our squat. So we're going to be going through two different variations of this today. One is going to be a body weight squat, which is going to consist with the warm up that we're going to be doing for this exercise. And the second variation is going to be a goblet squat, which is going to be applicable to the working sets that we're going to work through. But the fundamentals and the cues are going to be the exact same. The only difference is that the goblet squat, we're going to be holding the dumbbell nice and close to our chest, whereas the body weight squat, obviously we're going to be holding nothing at all. Okay, so from that point, what we're doing is we're setting our feet. Okay, so we want to be setting them around shoulder width apart with our toes slightly out. The biggest thing we want to focus on is making sure that we're creating tension in our lower body to make sure that our knees are going in the appropriate direction. So the way that we do that is a little cue that I like to use, which is called ripping the paper. So it's like we're standing on a big sheet of paper and we're going to be ripping the paper apart with our feet. Okay, so what that means is our body weight is going to start to shift into the outside of our feet and start to activate the outer part of our leg here. What that means is as we start to go down into our squat, our knees are naturally going to go out without having to think about it. Okay, with our arms are going to be out in front of us at around a shoulder width height, and from that position right in line with our eyes. Okay, so from there, we're going to be separating the floor, pushing back through our hips first and letting our knees go out, down to the bottom of the squat. From that position, slowly coming back up, not locking the knees out completely, keeping them slightly bent, and slowly going back down again and working our way through. From a depth perspective, we want to try and get our hip insertion down to in line with our knees, so we're going down to 90 degrees. Okay, so that would be your warm-up set. From that position, we then go into a goblet squat, where the same rule applies. Obviously, our palms are going to be under the top of the dumbbell, and it's going to be nice and close to our chest, obviously instead of our arms being out in front. So it's really important to keep your chin neutral now, because you don't have that visual gauge from your hands to make sure that your chest stays up. Okay, so from that position, we're doing the same thing again. We're separating the floor, we're keeping our chest proud, we're breaking from our hips first, and we're slowly going back down into our squat to 90 degrees and coming back up. Hips back, knees out, slowly going down to 90 degrees and coming back up. Okay, from that position, a few variations that I like to share with you that can help if there are things that you're struggling with. Sometimes people might experience their heels starting to elevate when they squat. When they go down, they struggle to keep their heels down. Now what that means is their calves and their calf insertion is quite tight. It's not allowing them to get full range of motion. Something that you can use instead is something that I've got behind me, which is a heel wedge. Now, not all gyms have these. Something that you can use instead is something like a pair of weight plates, or something similar to these, where you put them in the same position as where your feet are going to be, but from there you step on and your heels are now going to be elevated. It's almost like the ground is raised up, so you don't have to raise your heels up any higher to try and get the depth that you need. And the same rule applies. So from there, we're separating the floor, the hips are going back, but it's just going to allow you to get into that bottom position. The final variation that I'd like to share with you, which is if you struggle to get depth, something that you can use as a box to do a box squat. So something like what I've got behind me here. From that position, this is what you will use as your depth gauge. So when you stand in front, from that position, your hands go out and we're pushing back through our hips, slowly going down and physically sitting down on the box to start with, just to feel out where the depth is and how low the box is. From that position, we can stand back up. And then from there, we just want to go down and just feel our bum touch the box and then straight back up again. Going down, touching the box and straight up again. The things that we want to avoid is obviously our knees collapsing in or our chest dropping down. So just a recap of today's video, guys, just a few points to take away that you need to be mindful of. Number one is technique. So technique is the foundation of every exercise that you do, regardless of whether you're starting or whether you're the most advanced person in the world. It's the only thing that distinguishes the differences between exercises. It allows you to identify muscle groups that you're trying to work, and it's really important that you keep that as the number one priority in any exercise that you do, to make sure you're doing it safely, injury-free, and you actually enjoy the movements that you're doing. Okay, the second point, which is RPE. So again, going into that, it is circumstantial to today from a beginner level from people that I have taught this to, that I think is the best starting point in my opinion. But you know, there are other opinions out there that are just as viable as well. But in your RPE scales with every exercise that you're working towards today, just so you're in a position that you feel confident with the exercises that you're doing and you know you're doing them correctly, is pushing yourself to around a 7, maybe an 8 RPE out of 10. So remember what that means is any exercise that you do, when you finish the set that you're doing, you have 2 to 3 repetitions left in the tank that you could probably do. Okay, what that means is you haven't pushed yourself to complete failure, but you push yourself enough to be in a position where you feel the muscles that should be working. Okay, and then the final point that I'd like to point out for you guys is pain. If you start to feel pain and discomfort in certain areas that you shouldn't, and the easiest way to determine that is the exercises that you're doing, we know which muscles we're trying to work. If we're feeling it in other areas like our joints or anything along those lines, we need to reevaluate our technique and make sure that we're doing things correctly. Okay, so remember, again, just to reiterate, this is a starter program, this is a beginner level, and in later videos, we're going to go into more technical programming of things that you can start to do to test the waters through free weights training, and even through different techniques that you can be using on the current exercises that we did today. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, guys, and I hope to see you in the next one where we're going to be covering the topics of nutrition and making sure we have the foundation to be able to pair with the exercise that we've created today. Thanks, guys.